Good morning. Earlier this week, Dr. Long started a new topic for our Coffee with Bob each morning for this week. And so we're going to be talking about John Wesley. Remember, John Wesley is the founder of the Methodist movement back in the 1700s. John Wesley is one of my spiritual heroes of the faith. He really was somebody who was so dedicated to his faith, so dedicated to living it out. But he really was a very brilliant theologian. Probably a more brilliant theologian than I think he probably gets credit for in history compared to many of the other great theologians. But he really thought through his theology, his beliefs, his interpretation of Scripture, and was really committed to helping other people grow in their faith as well, thinking about what they believed. You find much of his theology in his sermons. You can go back and read many of his sermons that he wrote or preached over the course of his more than 60 years of ministry. You remember on Monday, Dr. Long told you how throughout his ministry, John Wesley would preach all over the English countryside, riding on horseback more than 250,000 miles back in the 1700s to preach the gospel message. He was an incredible man, committed to his faith, committed to spreading the gospel message. Well, I think one of his most important theological sermons that he wrote was one that he wrote back in 1741 on the topic of Christian perfection. That's what Dr. Long introduced to us on Monday. The whole topic of Christian perfection was really kind of a far-out idea in John Wesley's time. As Dr. Long told us, John Wesley's idea of Christian perfection was not that we would never make mistakes. He knew that we certainly would make mistakes still in our life. His idea of Christian perfection is that everything we say and we do is based out of a motivation of love for God and love for our neighbor. And he told you how all of the ministers of St. Luke's, all Methodist ministers from all time, have stood up at the time of our ordination at the altar and made a vow. We have said that we believe that we are going on to Christian perfection and that we expect to be made perfect in love in this lifetime with God's help. We say that because of our understanding of John Wesley's theology of what Christian perfection was. It wasn't about never making mistakes. It was about our motivations, being based out of love for God and love for our neighbor. Now, does that mean that we always get it right? Of course not. But we're striving for it, and each day we're trying to get there. When you go back and you read John Wesley's sermon on Christian perfection, it's fascinating to think about the time period in which he was writing this. Back in the 1740s, there was so much strife going on in England, so much infighting within the Church of England about who's right about this topic or that topic. There was still a lot of dispute about Catholicism, and then now all of the Protestants who were out there. There was so much going back and forth in these theological debates that were taking place. There had also been this pushback from sort of the movement of the Pietists, and they believed in a certain idea of perfection, but it really led people more to see that as a self-righteous kind of perfection. And so there was kind of a pushback from that. And so when John Wesley started talking about the idea of Christian perfection, it kind of gave a lot of people reason to pause. So it was near the end of 1740 that it was Bishop Edmund Gibson who came to John Wesley. He was one of Wesley's bishops there in the Church of England. He came to John Wesley and he sat down and he interviewed him and wanted to ask him about what he meant by Christian perfection. Because he was concerned it was going to give way to this sort of self-righteousness, this idea that I'm better than everybody else. He was concerned about that, so he went and sat down and talked with John Wesley. By the end of their interview, after Wesley had explained what he meant by Christian perfection, Bishop Gibson told John Wesley, "You need to publish this for everybody to read. Everybody needs to hear your thoughts about Christian perfection." He was that taken aback by it and believed so strongly in what Wesley was talking about. The idea of motivation, love for God and love for our neighbor. So it was a few months later in 1741 that John Wesley published his sermon, Christian Perfection. Now, we don't actually have any proof that he ever preached the sermon, but he did write it and he published it. And so we still have it and can read it to this day and try to understand more of his theology. And it was so important in that time. Why did Bishop Gibson feel so strongly about publishing it? Well, it really addressed the problems of what were going on in England. All of the infighting that was happening, it was leading way to people believing that I know the truth, And if I know the truth, then I must be right. And if you don't agree with me, then you must be wrong, and you must be bad, and you must be evil. It led people to start distinguishing, well, if you believe this, then you're a true child of God. And if you don't believe that, then you must be an evil person who is not a child of God. No, these lines and these divisions started getting drawn. And Bishop Gibson saw in Wesley's theology that it was no longer just this dualistic mindset of good and evil, right and wrong, black or white. It was more about the sense of motivation. Where's your heart in all of this? Not just having the proper beliefs, but the proper heart. So Wesley published his sermon, and he did believe so much in the importance of studying the scriptures and knowing what you believe. And yet at the same time, he found that there was still grace that maybe I might not know everything. Only God knows everything. And so even though I know what I believe about the scriptures, I could be wrong. And I need to still be willing to say, you're still a child of God. I want to read you what he wrote in his sermon about the topic of disagreeing on the scriptures. He said, "Hence, even the children of God are not agreed as to the interpretation of many places in Holy Writ, nor is their difference of opinion any proof that they are not the children of God on either side. But it is a proof that we are no more to expect any living man to be infallible than to be omniscient." It's fascinating for John Wesley to say that. Somebody who believes so much in the importance of the Holy Scriptures, studying them, interpreting, finding out what you believe. For him to come out and write in his sermon and say, even children of God are not always going to agree on the interpretation of the Holy Scriptures. But just because we have a difference of opinion is not proof that one side is the children of God and the other side is not. No, it proves that we're not infallible. We're going to make mistakes. It proves that we don't know everything. We don't have all the truth. So we need to have grace for one another. That even when we study and we try to find what we believe, we might be wrong. And so our heart needs to be in the right place so that we can continue to love God and try to love one another the very best that we can. After all, that's what Jesus asked of us. In fact, that's what he said was the greatest commandment. Not that we get all of our beliefs exactly right, not that we interpret the scriptures exactly correctly or that we have all knowledge. No, Jesus said the greatest commandment is to love God with everything that you have and to love your neighbor as you love yourself. No exceptions. I think if we go out and do that this week, we're going to be going on to Christian perfection. We're going to see amazing things happen in this world. I hope you have a great day.